Have you ever felt like you're caught in a spiritual tug of war? On one side, you hear all these messages about simplicity, about letting go, being content with just the basics. But then on the other side, you're told to go after a life of abundant, just overflowing joy. It can feel like a total paradox, right? Well, today, we're going to dive right into that tension. So let's just put it right out there. Should Christians settle for less? It sounds like a pretty simple question, but as we're about to find out, the answer is, well, it's anything but simple. And this, right here, is where all the confusion starts. On the one hand, we're taught about simplicity and contentment. Be happy with what you've got. But on the other hand, there's this huge call to pursue a fullness of joy, to actually seek out the maximum possible satisfaction in God. So, how can both of those things be true at the same time? Let's break it down. Okay, so first up, let's really look at the case for contentment. What does the Bible actually have to say about finding our well-being somewhere other than in just getting more and more stuff? A really foundational piece of this whole idea comes from the Apostle Paul. He writes that godliness, when you pair it with contentment, is great gain. He puts our whole life in this massive perspective. Look, we come into the world with nothing, and we're going to leave with nothing. So because of that, he says the baseline for being content is actually shockingly simple, just having food and clothing. Now, to really get this, we've got to look at the original Greek. The word Paul uses for contentment is autarkeia. Now, in Greek culture, this meant being self-sufficient, needing nothing from anyone else. But Paul completely redefines it. He says for a Christian, it's not self-sufficiency, it's God's sufficiency. It's a deep sense of well-being that comes from God, not from what's in your bank account. So, and this is absolutely crucial, the goal here isn't to make everyone poor. It's all about our inner posture. The Bible warns against the love of money, not money itself. It's about getting to a place inside where basic provision really, truly feels like enough, so we can finally detach our happiness from what we own. And Jesus makes the same point, maybe even more directly. He warns against all pleonexia, which is a fantastic Greek word that means this greedy, grasping, insatiable desire for more. And then he just says it plainly. A real life, a meaningful life, has absolutely nothing to do with how much stuff you have. Okay, so the case for contentment is pretty strong. It's all about detaching our happiness from things. But is that the whole story? Is the peak of spiritual maturity just wanting less and less until you want almost nothing? Well, as you probably guessed, there's another and equally important side to this whole thing. And that brings us to the second part of our little investigation, the command for joy. And here's where we get the surprising twist. The Bible doesn't just suggest joy as a nice idea, it actually commands it. And we're not talking about some minimal, just barely getting by kind of joy. We're talking about a maximal one. I mean, listen to the language here in Psalm 16. It's anything but minimal. It talks about a fullness of joy and pleasures forevermore. That is the language of absolute abundance, of eternal delight, not of just settling for a tiny bit of happiness. And just like we saw with contentment, the original language here is so revealing. The Hebrew phrase is sova semachot. This doesn't just mean full. It literally means a saturation of joys. Think about being completely soaked, just totally overwhelmed by it. This is a maximal, overflowing, God-centered joy. It is the polar opposite of settling. So, the conclusion you get from texts like these is pretty much unavoidable. The Bible commands joy. It's not presented as some kind of emotional bonus for the lucky ones, but as a core central mission for every single believer. So, how in the world do we solve this puzzle? On one side, we have a command for contentment. On the other, a command for a saturation of joy. This brings us to the key question. Is the real goal to desire less, or is it to desire better? Well, the Bible basically gives us a simple 3-act play to understand this. In creation, humans were designed with this massive capacity for desire, and it was meant to find its ultimate fulfillment in God. But then comes the fall, and that powerful desire gets broken and redirected to our created things: money, status, approval. So the story of redemption is all about God restoring our desire, re-aiming it toward the only thing that can actually satisfy it, Himself. And right there, That is the big idea that solves our paradox. See, the spiritual journey isn't about killing your desires, trying to shrink them down until you want nothing at all. It's about reordering your desires. It's about taking that powerful engine of I want that's inside every single one of us and finally pointing it in the right direction. Okay, so let's land the plane here. This brings us to the final, nuanced answer to our big question. What does all this theology actually mean for how we live our lives, day to day? So here it is, the final answer. We are absolutely called to settle for less when it comes to that frantic chase for more stuff, or tying our identity to earthly status. But, and this is a huge but, we must never settle for less in our pursuit of joy, satisfaction, and fulfillment in God. In that area, we are called to be relentlessly, passionately ambitious. So, the crucial point, the one big idea to walk away with from all of this, is right here. The spiritual goal isn't to have less desire, it's to have a better desire. It's all about redirecting that infinite longing we all have away from finite things and pointing it toward the only infinite source of joy there is. And that just leaves us with one last really provocative question to think about. Because this isn't just abstract theology, this is intensely practical. So take a moment and honestly ask yourself, what things, what people, or what ambitions in my life are competing with God for my ultimate joy? Because the answer to that question, well, it changes everything.